Thank you, Jawad, and thank you for inviting me to this first of series of events that you have planned for Asiavision. And today is an interesting day because today I also complete 4 years as the CEO of Prasar Bharati. So thank you for making this day something to remember by, that I got to interact with all of you. Before I start my remarks, I just want to take a couple of moments to pay tributes to all the media persons, broadcast industry professionals who have become unfortunate victims of COVID-19, this pandemic that we're all coping with and struggling. We at Prasar Bharati have unfortunately lost about more than 100 colleagues of ours over the last 1 year. And I'm sure similar situation must be there across the globe, where several media persons have been exposed to this virus. And even though we have had lockdowns and various pauses, the media industry, especially the broadcast industry, the public broadcasters have had no pause. We've worked right through this very tough time. So I think the contribution of media persons has to be remembered. Because they're no less frontline workers in creating awareness and informing the citizens on this pandemic. Can we have my slide on, please? Thank you. So when I was looking at, thinking over what to talk about today in this gathering of editors and newsroom professionals, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was, we're all talking about the new normal, and the new normal has posed a very unique, set of challenges for newsrooms across the globe. I think the first big challenge was, how do you operate in this new normal where with so many restrictions, so many constraints, people are remotely located, we're not physically co-located, there's no FaceTime. How do you cope with that? And I think that itself brings a complexity to how the newsroom operates. Going beyond that constraint itself is the big question on, what do you focus on? What do you prioritize, right? And this has been a very fast changing situation. When the first news of the pandemic came last year, we were just about trying to unravel or discover what this was about, what works, what doesn't work, what should we do, what should we not do. And then our own whole understanding of the virus and its complexities kept changing, right? The precautions changed. Masks became important, ventilation became important, aerosol transmission became the dominant mode. So our whole understanding of COVID-19 itself was evolving every month or every week. New things were being discovered. Especially in India during the second wave, one of the things that we had to cope with was a completely new dimension around fungus called mucormycosis. And so because people were using oxygen masks and they were using steroids, sometimes not properly prescribed. So it was having all these other side effects. And there was not enough awareness around that. So how do you inform, how do you report on this without creating panic? I think that is the biggest question, right? Because it is so easy to create a panic where people start making the wrong choices, wrong decisions based on half-baked information. And I think that is one of the principal challenges that newsrooms have had to cope with. And when you take a country as large as India, not just in terms of scale of population, which of course, is 1.3 billion, but also the complexity of social complexity, because we have 25 plus official languages, then you have hundreds of dialects. So public messaging is a very complex exercise because it has to be accurate, it has to be comprehensive, and it has to be targeted in these various languages and dialects. And I think that is where both Doordarshan and All India Radio have distinguished themselves in being able to take the flood of information that was coming in and then packaging it and targeting it for dissemination across the various regions of the country in the various languages. And that is a mammoth task in itself. And all of this was possible largely because we made some key changes in how we operated over the last 3 years since I came to Prasar Bharati. One of the first thing was to bring in information technology, because this organization was completely paper-based. Everything was manual. All decision making was manual. To go from there to using today IT for everyday decision making, to use digital tools for content activities, social media dissemination, and so on. And to be able to automate a lot of functions which were otherwise being manual. Those really helped in this new normal, and I think they came as a boon to the newsrooms. So since they were all psychologically prepared to use these tools, it became that much easier to embrace Zoom and all the remote conferencing that was happening. And so it kind of laid the foundation for us to operate in this new normal. And I think that was a key enabler, key game changer for us. But that's, on the technology side, the mechanics of news gathering and news dissemination. But I think there was a bigger phenomenon that was playing out all through this pandemic. And it is something that has also been written about and discussed in the past. Some of you may be familiar or not, depending on those with a journalistic background, I'm sure would be familiar with this Norwegian professor. His name is Johan Galtung, and he had in the 1960s written a very scientific paper on what are the factors underlying news reporting, and he kind of gave a warning back then in the 1960s that news tends to focus a lot on conflicts, on immediacy, and this has a potential for news to become far too negative, sensational, and adversarial. And I think this is something that we've seen in the last few years, across democracies, across open, societies, where news has tended to become more and more negative and sensational, especially with the advent of social media and digital media. But during the pandemic, I think this assumed a completely different scale. And I think that poses a big question. What are the values that your newsroom decisions should be driven by? How much of do you focus on the problems versus how much do you focus on the solutions? I think this is goes back to some of the key points that Johan Galtung wrote several decades back. And what we saw in India was a whole flood of negative news, to the degree where funerals were being shown on television screens and being splashed on videos and social media and so on. And it kind of created an environment of extreme negativity. And I think that is where the public broadcaster, the public media in India was a stark contrast, because not only was news being delivered in a very responsible way, we were also focused on the solutions rather than overly focusing on the negativity of the problems. So for example, DD News and DD India through the day had programs where they had doctors live to take questions from viewers and from all over India, clarify their doubts, because as the second wave was having its impact, there were a lot of faulty prescriptions that were going on. People were using drugs that they should not be using at all. People were consuming steroids, which were absolutely the wrong thing to happen at that point in time. So it was very important to have the right medical advice be given to citizens across India. And both DD News, AR News, DD India were playing a very key role in bringing in specialists from across the country to take questions and to give the right advice. And this was happening live on television through the day. So that was a very big, important step that Doordarshan took. Another step, I think, in fact, last year we started this, where when we noticed that, as things were getting better, especially in January and February, when, the case count had gone down drastically, that people were, getting lax. People had stopped wearing masks. So we took a proactive decision, and this was not a diktat from anyone in the government or anything. We took a decision within our new setup that we will have a logo running on all our television screens, asking people to mask up. So you have this animation at one corner of the screen, which would show how to wear a mask, and it would be on screen all day, 24/7. And we then extended it to all languages across our network. So all our regional news units and regional channels, everyone was carrying this mask up logo. And during April, by when things started going really bad with the second wave, we took another decision. And I think this was for the first time, at least in India. I'm not aware in other countries if this is happening. All of our anchors on screen are wearing masks now. For two reasons. One, of course, the studios are poorly ventilated, so there is a high risk for exposure to them. But more importantly, to drive home the point to the viewers and the citizens that the importance of wearing the masks till everyone is safe, everyone is vaccinated. The second area where I think DD News and DD India played an important role is in creating vaccine awareness, because one aspect is the precautions on the COVID side and the right medical advice. But the other dimension to it was to get everyone vaccinated as quickly as possible. And to that extent, to ensure that vaccine hesitancy is removed. So we had a whole bunch of celebrities, asking people to get themselves vaccinated. And there was a tremendous effort across the country to keep information about vaccine availability, vaccine camps, and the general awareness on precautions and after effects and so on. Also, more importantly, the fake news, because there's a whole flood of fake news that was happening on social media and even some amount of regular media as well. So to proactively counter the fake news and get the right information out. I think these were various areas where the newsroom played an important role, that we want to be a part of enabling a solution rather than playing negative the entire day, just highlighting the problems. So that was a key difference that happened. One other dimension that I wanted to bring about was in news reporting, and again we've seen this globally. Around the question of the origins of the virus, the naming of the various variants, where again there's a whole sensitivity angle to it. So how do you strike the right balance where political sensitivities are involved without suppressing the truth? And I think this is another very important aspect where newsrooms have to make an important choice. So that you ensure that while sensitivities are respected, the truth is not compromised in any way. And I think this is where public service media can really show leadership, because we don't operate on the same principles as the commercial media, and we have the greater good as our shared objective or shared goal. So the choices that public service media makes can be a role model, can be an example to all of the media. And I think it's very great that we are having these sessions where platforms like ABU are bringing together newsrooms, news professionals, and public service media across regions to share best practices, to learn from one another, so that we are continuing to play this important role of being an enabler of positivity, of solutions rather than aggravating the problems, and we have the greater global good as a shared value that drives all of us, motivates all of us. Once again, I think there's a great platform. Very happy that all the editors-in-chief are coming together, and one of your agenda items is the Tokyo Olympics. I really hope and pray that the Olympics are held in a safe manner, and then everyone who's reporting from Tokyo and is covering the games is safe and healthy. And this could be another moment where we can show collectively how public broadcasters across the Asia Pacific region can come together to create something for the greater global good. So thank you again, Jawad, for this opportunity. I'll be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Shashi. Thank you for your time. It was a wonderful presentation. And I would like to ask you to stay a few more minutes to get a few questions. I open the floor for any question. You can raise hand if you want to put any question to Mr. Shashi. While I wait to hear hands, I would like to put the first question, Mr. Shashi. You mentioned many things. Of all these strategies that you have outlined, is there one that stands out as the most crucial in these challenging times from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the IT enablement of our decision making. So historically, we have operated in a paper-based manner. All decision making is recorded in physical files, and that was the environment that I came to in 2017. And I came from an IT sector where we were zero paper, everything was digital, everything was online. So to me, it was a huge culture shock. I went from never having to sign my name to having to sign my name at least 100 times every day on paper. So that was something that I was determined that had to change. I mean, it took us a while to get the right platform in place, the right workflows in place. But over a 2.5, 3-year period, we got a large part of the organization to migrate to what we call e-office, where all routine decision making is now electronic and IT workflow based. Now that was a huge differentiator for us, a game changer actually, because unlike other parts of the government which had severe restrictions on using such tools, we had a much more liberal approach where you could access the e-office from anywhere. You could be at home, you could be at an airport, didn't matter. So that gave huge flexibility when people were forced to work from home, because decision making did not stop, and that kept the wheels of the organization rotating, and that kept us going.
And how do you think that this, I can say, a new strategy of e-office, mobile office, home office, and that sort of things, how do you see that after the COVID situation? Do you think that...
Well, now it has become the de facto standard. In fact, at one point I stopped, I used to refuse to sign on paper. I said, I would just send it back saying, if you don't submit it electronic, it's not going to get approved. So that got people to, really adopt it. And now I think it has become the de facto standard. So there is no going back to paper. Also now people have embraced other tools where data-based, data-oriented decision-making has become very important, because this was not happening earlier. Earlier, everything would be prose. You would get 5-page essays for any question. Now you get charts, you get tables. People are becoming more and more information and data oriented in their approach to solving issues that crop up.
You talked about the messages that All India Radio or Doordarshan should convey to billion audiences, and you touched rightly the cultural diversity that exists, and different languages that exist, different, I would say, categories of audience that exist. And I'm wondering how you can manage giving the right message to the right target in such a huge populated country, 1.3 billion. It's manageable in a country where we live, 13 million, but it's quite difficult in a country like India. Do you do it through the stations and you have 400 radio stations, you have 35 television stations, or do you address to different medium or mobile? How do you reach the public and so on?
Yeah, so it's happening at three levels. At the lowermost level, individual stations have their own, staff who, speak different dialects and languages and are able to produce content. Then at the next level, you have at a state level, you have two or three news units, newsrooms, which put together material which is of relevance to that region, and then that gets propagated down to all the stations within that region. Then at the national level, you have the national perspective, and that content, once it gets created, is pushed down in 20 to 25 languages. So this hierarchy is something that All India Radio has perfected over the decades, and it works well, and we've relied on it substantially. In fact, one of the areas, this is something that used to not happen in the past, but over the last 3-4 years we've done it, is when the Prime Minister addresses the nation, it's either in Hindi or English. Now, how do you get that to the various parts of the country? So we've started the process where within a couple of hours of the Prime Minister delivering his address, it gets translated into all these languages, and these different language versions are put out within a couple of hours. Now, often these are not prepared remarks, so you don't have an advance copy. So you have to wait for the actual speech to be delivered by the Prime Minister, and then you do this entire exercise. And that mechanism has now been perfected, where especially during COVID, there were several points, key moments, where the PM had to come and tell the country, what was happening and what is being done by the government. And it is very important for that public message to go across the country, and to do it in these languages requires a back-end mechanism, which we have now fine-tuned, and we are able to turn it around within a couple of hours.
Do you think, Mr. Shashi, that COVID has in a way expedited the move towards digitization, not in India only, but also in the region, because of the necessity of reaching the public, and because of the necessity of production and delivery content and all new things that digital offers?
Absolutely, and I think we can see it with e-commerce, just the manner in which e-commerce has grown, because people are unable to go to the regular traditional retail markets and malls frequently, and you see the growth of e-commerce is a very strong indicator of how the citizens across the country have taken to digital. Now, on the flip side, this has created a problem as well, especially person-to-person messaging tools like WhatsApp have become the largest source of wrong information, faulty information, and often causing a lot of damage. And I think that will be the big challenge for us going forward, that digital has lowered the barrier to access information. It has made it easier to disseminate it. And the flip side of that is the wrong kind of information is also as easily spreading as the right information. So you have to fight this battle. You have to constantly counter the wrong facts, reinforce the right messages. And it's very challenging in an environment where person-to-person messaging can very easily amplify in a very nonlinear, exponential way rumors and gossip and faulty information.
Thank you. I notice Mr. Afro, a senior colleague from Asiavision, would like to have a question. Afro?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rawat. Thank you, Mr. Shashi. Now, some of the issues we face with public broadcasters is the balance between holding governments accountable and giving the right information, especially during crisis situations like this during the pandemic. It is vital that public broadcasters keep authorities in check, to report on what is happening wrong, report on what can be done, report on corruption and all this. But there needs to be, like you mentioned, the balance where you don't create fear, or you don't create too much negativity in the public. So how do you find this balance, and how do you approach this?
I think it's a very interesting question. In India, we've addressed it in our own different way. So let me give a context first. India, as you know, being a democracy, being open media market, we have close to 900 or 800 television channels. So there's a whole diversity of opinion out there. And we ourselves, as the public broadcaster, have a free-to-air satellite platform on which we have more than 20-25 different news channels, private news channels, along with our public channels. So when people ask me this question, as a public broadcaster, how do you, ensure you're not just doing projecting the government's version? How are you, bringing a diversity of opinion? So my reply to that is, I am taking a diversity of opinion to about 40 million households, 45 million households, where they don't just get my version of what is happening on DD News or DD India, but they get 25 other counter opinions and counter views from all these private news channels. So in that sense, I'm not too concerned about is the public broadcaster being adversarial? Is it doing only the government view or the public view? Because we have such a diversity of news that is being delivered in a free-to-air manner, that the people are getting the right versions and the counter questions, the right views and the counter views. So in that sense, we are addressing the balance in a slightly different way. Apart from that, within our own network, our own platform, we do bring in a diversity of voices on certain programs, though we don't do it in the same manner that the private news industry does. So it's a mix of both diversity of voices within our platform and a much bigger, wider bouquet of news offerings. So everyone gets to see the different views and counter views.
Okay, while I offer the floor to other colleagues to ask questions, Mr. Shashi, I've got two quick questions. What about, what do you do in challenging in responding to fake news? I mean, in such a big environment, big population, so many channels, etc., fake news is a fact. So how Durashan, how All India Radio react on that?
So we have a digital unit called Prasar Bharati News Service, and they are very active on social media, actively looking at fake news that's coming up and countering it. So they become the input source to our larger teams on TV and radio to pick up any major fake news that is going around, so that it can be countered and busted. This team also works actively with a team in the government, which the government has created for fact checking, because often what happens is public announcements get distorted on social media. Very legitimate looking infographics are circulated where you think it's a government press release, while it is not. It is doctored or a fake image and so on. So they deal with a much larger volume of fact check, and they're also an important source for us. So together, between that fact check unit, our news service, the teams have been actively working through the day to spot and pick fake news. There are also technology tools. There are third party who are doing that, but those are, I would say, at an experimental stage. They're not very sophisticated at this point. However, one challenge that I do see with countering fake news, that it becomes very political, because some of these fact checkers have political motivations, and so when big platforms like a Google or a Facebook or a Twitter, recognizes them or as an authenticated fact checker, I think they need to do more due diligence, so that political partisan fact checking is not allowed, is not encouraged, is not given a wide platform, and I think that's also a big challenge.
Thank you. My last question, and perhaps the last question of this session to you, refers to the last point that you mentioned, public service media newsroom must show leadership in the new normal. Given the fact that the audience of this platform, this forum, are colleagues from the news department, what would be your last advice to the news people of the Asiavision in delivering this message that public service media newsroom should take a lead in this challenging time?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, really what are your core journalistic values? I mean, asking questions, going after the truth, absolutely, but recognize that it's a means to an end. It is not the end in itself. And I think the end has to be the greater global good. It has to be about positivity. It has to be about solving problems. So I think as long as we have that moral compass in place, I think the public service media newsrooms will, show that leadership. They'll become role models.
Mr. Shashi, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your contribution. It was wonderful to have you with us today, and I sincerely appreciate your contribution. And I would like to thank you on behalf of all colleagues and also on behalf of the Secretariat.